Hi BookTube, Aaron here. Hope you're doing very well. Today I've got it's a response video that has been a long time coming. Quite some time ago, Joe Spivey made a video about 5 poets that he likes, he enjoys, and that you can read and get to know better. And then a short time after he made that video, Joshua Kribo also made his own list of 5 poets. So he went through the 5 poets that Joe had mentioned and sort of went through his own relationship to those poets before then giving his own list. And I really liked both videos, and as soon as I saw them, was planning to make my own version, and then I forgot. And I was just sort of reminded recently that I've been planning to do this, and so I've gone back and I've found the sort of list of poets that both Joe and Joshua used for their videos. So I'll go through and sort of briefly, give my opinion of each of those poets, and then I've got my own list of 5 poets that at least I think you might like, that might be worth reading and getting to know a bit better. So let's jump into Joe's list first. The first poet that he mentions is John Donne, who is one of my favourite poets, still a poet I feel I need to get to know better, but I really enjoy John Donne's poetry, and he's sort of known for sort of 2 sort of periods of his poetry that are quite different, but I think are equally kind of brilliant. The first was when he was younger, and they're very kind of lecherous poems, I suppose, about lust and desire and stuff like that. Only it's often sort of shrouded in metaphor. And he also wrote satires and things like that. But it's worth noting he never actually published any of his poems while he was alive. They were found after he died, and the point of these poems were to sort of write them and then share them with your friends and sort of show off how witty you were. He's also known for his holy sonnets, which I think are much more personal, and they're sort of very religious. They're about his relationship with God, and it's not always straightforward, not exactly what you would expect, but it's still just as alive and as startling as the early poems. And so I think they're the 2 sort of periods that, at least as far as I'm aware, he's most known for. He's also well known for his sermons as well, and the earlier ones, at least in here, are collected as songs and sonnets, and then there's the holy sonnets as well. So John Donne, Joe Spivey's first pick, pretty good. Number 2, I don't have an individual book for this one, but it's Alexander Pope, and so for any poet I don't have an individual book for. Here's my Norton anthology, so I'll just sort of shake that around. There's certainly some Pope in here. In fact, I know there's some Pope in here. I've read bits and bobs of Pope, and I'm not a massive fan just generally of that period of poetry. It's just too perfect, too precise, that it doesn't, at least to me, it doesn't feel very alive. It shows up, it does its job very well, but there's not much else there for me. So I'm not a massive fan of Pope, but I haven't read a lot of Pope either. So sort of take my words with a grain of salt, and maybe in a few years' time I might be a massive fan, but yeah, not my favourite. Number 3 is William Shakespeare. I've got his complete sonnets and poems here. So it's got all the sonnets, wonderful. It's got his narrative, his longer narrative poems, like Venus and Adonis. It's got I'm blanking out on names. Lucrece in here, Passionate Pilgrim, Let the Bird of Loudest Lay, which I don't remember very well, A Lover's Complaints, and yeah, so other bits and bobs. But yeah, I mean, you could just have this, and it would be wonderful. It'll be some of the best poetry in the English language. But also, you can't really discount the plays as well. And really, some of his best poetry is in his plays. So William Shakespeare, can't really go wrong. Number 4 is Byron. Again, I don't have an individual volume for Byron, so again, I'm just going to come out and sort of shake the Norton anthology. Again, I don't know Byron as well as I should. I'm a fan of the Romantic period, and I think he kind of stands slightly apart from the rest of the Romantics. He was, sort of friends with Shelley, and he, would go on to criticize Keats and things. But I've sort of heard it said, and would probably agree, that his poetry is actually a little closer to people like Alexander Pope and John Dryden and people like that, and he's sort of writing out of that tradition. The thing with Byron, and it's the thing that makes me think there might be some hope for Alexander Pope, is that I'm never expecting to enjoy Byron when I go to read some of his poetry, and then I read it and I'm annoyed, really annoyed, because it's so good. So yeah, a great pick, and a poet that I really should know a lot better. Then number 5, again, a poet that I underestimate, but is really wonderful, and that's Tennyson. And I've got this sort of mouse-eaten edition of his poems here. Just a wonderful, masterful poet, and at some point I'll probably go and read In Memoriam all in one sitting, and at some point I'll just have to dive in straight into his work and make a project out of it. Then on to Joshua's list. I'm quite a big fan of Joshua's list, and actually on the whole a big fan of Joe's list as well. But the jury's out on Pope, but we'll get there. Number 1 for Joshua is Paradise Lost, well, just John Milton. I feel like I'm going to be saying this again and again and again. A poet I really need to get to know much better. I was very impressed with with Joshua's video, that he'd memorized sort of sections of some of these poets' poems, and so he was just there reading the beginning of Paradise Lost, and it was brilliant. And I've loved Milton in the excerpts of Paradise Lost that I've read in anthologies, in the sort of shorter poems that I've read. So yeah, definitely a poet to check out. Number 2, again, a great pick, a poet I love. I've read a fair bit by, but there's a lot more that I'd love to read. William Wordsworth, and just a remarkable poet who I was very happy that actually Wordsworth came straight after Milton, because I feel like for someone like me who isn't a massive fan of post-Restoration poetry, so again, sorry Alexander Pope, sorry John Dryden, he reaches back, sort of past them, back to Milton, I think, and sort of captures the sort of vitality in his poetry, that there's just, I won't say there was no life in Pope or Dryden. This is just going to be a long video about me talking about how I don't like Pope. But there's certainly a different kind of life, and there's a vitality in Shakespeare, a vitality in Donne, a vitality in Milton that's missing in those poets, and Wordsworth seems to reach back to them and recapture it. And so just a wonderful poet who can, I don't know, he sort of captures so much of just what it is to be alive. I suppose it's hard to put into words. Next up, another romantic poet, and although not my favourite romantic poet, I think the most impressive of all of them, and that was Percy Bysshe Shelley, who is just wonderful. Again, there was more. There was another memorised reading from Joshua for Shelley, and just a wonderful, wonderful poet. Who I mean, this is about 600 or about 500 pages of his poetry here that I can remember just sort of relishing, and I'd love to go back and again just jump right in. And then the next two poets, again, I don't have an individual book for them, so the Norton's back. So we've got A.E. Housman, A Shropshire Lad, and other works like that. I've read poems from A Shropshire Lad in anthologies, and I'm still sort of making up my mind. I haven't sort of formed that deep relationship with this poet that other people have, and so I would, I couldn't recommend him as strongly because I don't know the poetry as well, but there is something to how people relate to those poems that is really, really lovely, and so it makes me think I do need to spend some time with Houseman at some point. And then number 5 is James Merrill. So again, the Norton, because I don't have any James Merrill, and I'm not entirely sure if I've ever read any James Merrill. So you'll have to go back to Joshua's video, see what he has to say about James Merrill. But yeah, so far, it's a poet I've yet to discover. And then there's my list, and so what I thought I'd do is, so it's all of this, with the exception of James Merrill. These are all English poets, and so I thought I'd sort of try and choose a few poets that weren't English, although there are some. Well, actually, there's I think one English poet here, and then we'll go on from there. So number 1. As I said, Shelley isn't my favourite romantic poet, because my favourite romantic poet, if you can make it out on the spine, is Keats. And I don't know, there's just something with Keats. Maybe it's just that he's a bit more immediate, maybe slightly more accessible than some of the other romantics. But then Coleridge is quite accessible as well, so it's hard, but I mean, they're all quite accessible, really. But I don't know, he just strikes a chord in a certain way. And I thought with each of the poets on my list, I'd read a short excerpt for you. So this is one of Keats' earlier poems, and it's kind of his first hit, I suppose. It's On First Looking into Chapman's Homer. Much have I travelled in the realms of gold, and many goodly states and kingdoms seen. Round many western islands have I been, which bards in fealty to Apollo hold. Oft of one wide expanse had I been told, that deep-browed Homer ruled as his demesne. Yet did I never breathe its pure serene, until I heard Chapman speak out loud and bold. Just realised it was demesne, not demence. Sorry. When felt I like some watcher in the skies, when a new planet swims into its ken, or like a stout Cortez, when with eagle eyes he stared at the Pacific, and all his men looked at each other with a wild surmise, silent upon a peak in Darien. I feel annoyed that I butchered it, but yeah, just a wonderful poet. Then number 2, an American poet, and it's Emily Dickinson. I'm currently reading Emily Dickinson, and so I just picked up the book at random, and I've been sort of starring certain poems as they sort of stand out when I'm reading them. And I just picked one of the random ones that I starred recently. It's a really short one. It's probably not, it's not a very famous Emily Dickinson poem, but it does capture what I like about her poetry, and will do a better job of sort of showing you what I mean. So this is poem number 437, and the first line is, "Prayer is the little implement. Prayer is the little implement through which men reach where presence is denied them. They fling their speech by means of it in God's ear. If then he hear, this sums up the apparatus comprised in prayer." So actually, as the way the words sound, I love that last line, comprised in prayer, the way the P's are sort of going on there. But a really curious little poem, trying to talk about prayer, something spiritual, something religious, in this kind of scientific language, and you kind of see a lot of that. There's a strange curiosity to it, whether it's the curiosity of Dickinson coming across in the poem, or whether the poem itself is just so strange. It arouses this curiosity in you, and you just can't help but try and look a little deeper into what she's saying, because on the surface it's often sort of apparently simple. Just a great poet. A lot of the poems are generally quite short, but they often inspire daydreams and things like that. Next up, then, with the next 3 poets, so we're sort of moving out of, I suppose, the realm of poets you might be taught about in school. So the next poet is a Scottish poet, and is one of my all-time favourite poets. He's very odd. He's not as monumental as some of the other poets already mentioned. There's something kind of cosy to him, something very idiosyncratic about him, and there's just a really winning charm to his poetry as well. It's W.S. Graham. So a lot of these have been romantic poets, Victorian poets. W.S. Graham was writing in the mid 20th century, so he started writing poems, started publishing poems, I think in the 1940s, and then sort of from the 50s onwards, he sort of went underground, and then he made a bit of a sort of revival. He sort of resurrected his life as a poet in the 70s. So he didn't write a lot. He was sort of I don't know, he was sort of drowned out by the noise that the kind of movement poets, the poetry that was popular in Britain in the 1950s, that they kind of drowned out what he was doing, because his poetry was more romantic. It had a lot in common with Shelley, some of his early poetry, I think, but also a very obvious influence of Dylan Thomas as well. So that's W.S. Graham. He eventually sort of found his own feet and came to this kind of style. So I'll read you the opening of a long poem that he wrote called "The Night Fishing," which is about going out fishing at night on a fairly large fishing vessel, and it's out at sea. It's not on a nice calm lake or anything, and it's also about language and writing, as pretty much all of his poems are, at least the later period. And eventually I'll have to make a video reading the whole poem. It's quite a long poem, but I'll just have to do it one of these days. So this is the opening of The Night Fishing. Very gently struck the key night bell. Now within the dead of night and the dead of my life I hear my name called from far out. I'm come to this place, which I'll not pass, though one shall pass, wearing seemingly this look I move as. This staring second breaks my home away, through always every night, through every whisper, from the first that once named me to this bone. Yet this place finds me and forms itself again. This present place found me. I could go on. Kind of hypnotic, kind of very. There's just an oddness, a sort of a preciseness that to the language that's slightly off kilter. So it's precise in its own way, like I'm come to this place instead of I have come to this place. I suppose it sort of suggests that he's. It's almost more like he's found himself somewhere, rather than suggesting a kind of agency. But anyway, I hope that just gives you a taste of his poetry. The sea is often in a lot of his poems. He often lived in places near to the sea, and just a wonderful poet who I think has made a bit of a resurgence in the last 10 or 20 years. I think I'm seeing his books in bookshops a little more often now, which is good. He'd been largely forgotten for quite a long time. Then number 4, I think the only poet here where it's not original. It wasn't originally written in English. I thought I'd share some translated poetry with you. It's a bit of a dilemma that I found myself in, where I love reading translated poetry, but I can't escape the fact that I'm not reading the original, and as good a job as the translator might do, I'm reading something different. There's something in the way, and particularly with poetry, where so much is about how the language works, how it sounds, the lyricism of it. It's hard to have that connection, and even when the translator's doing a good job, you're still doubting how close you're getting to the original poem. So it's difficult, but despite all of that, I think probably my favourite poet of all time, the poet who intrigues me the most, and who I just find myself at least once a year just coming back to, is Rilke, and he's just a fabulous, kind of almost existentialist poet, and I don't really know how to. I think I do talk about him a fair bit, but yeah, there's just something with Rainer Maria Rilke that continually intrigues me and excites me and comforts me. So I thought I'd read probably some of the most famous lines, not in German. He originally wrote in German. It's from the first elegy of his Duino elegy. They go like this: Who, if I cried out, would hear me among the angels' orders? And even if one of them passed me suddenly to his heart, I'd be consumed in his more potent being. For beauty is nothing but the beginning of terror, which we can still barely endure. And while we stand in wonder, it coolly disdains to destroy us. Every angel is terrifying. So really rather odd, but I mean, I could have read his poem on the torso of Apollo, which is about him looking at a statue, and there's the famous final lines of "You must change your life," which are it's almost like sort of a bolt of thunder out of the blue. So that's another famous poem by him. But yeah, my favourite poet, I find it difficult to express exactly what it is that keeps getting me coming back to him. But I'd heartily recommend him. There are loads of other translations, but I think I would still recommend picking up this. This is the translation by Edward Snow, The Poetry of Rilke, and it essentially disregards a lot of his early poetry, which was very sentimental, I suppose, and sort of later in life he kind of disregarded it as well. So it kind of starts with, I think it's the Book of Hours, which was a kind of new direction for him, and it sort of set his course for the rest of his career. So yeah, it goes from the Book of Hours through to the Duino Elegies and Sonnets for Orpheus. So yeah, I'll stop rambling on about him, but I'd really recommend Rilke. And then the last poet, another thing I noticed, very few living poets, from what I could tell. I'm not sure if James Merrill is still alive. I should have probably checked. He's certainly relatively recent, from I think the sort of mid to late 20th century. So there's a chance he's still alive. Well, I'll have to check after making the video. But I thought I'd go with a more contemporary poet that I enjoy. My favourite living poet is Alice Oswald, but I talk about her all the time in my videos, it seems, and so I thought I'd choose another poet who I've only read one book by, but I'm just always impressed when I come back to this book. I really need to find some more of her poetry. This is A. Starlings, an American poet based in Greece. I think, like Alice Oswald, is continually obsessed by the ancient world, by the ancient Greeks, and she lives, at least at the time of this, she lives in Athens. And on the whole, she's often quite a formal poet. And what I thought I'd do, I can't remember if I've read this poem before, but I'll read it anyway. It's called Half of an Epic Simile Not Found in Hesiod. As at the winter solstice, when a faded blonde on the brink of middle age goes to the salon to brighten up her outlook and her spirits, warm water on her scalp, the rich shampoo that breathes of almond blossoms, to submit to another's expert, disinterested caresses, while outside the plate glass window people push against the dwindling year and lean into the wind, their foreheads pinched with doubts and debts. And it's afternoon, but night comes chattering down like the shutters of a shop in a recession, and all she asks for is a colour adjustment, for rays of honey to eclipse the grey, and for the light to lengthen just a little. So actually, it's sort of one of her poems where it's not quite as formal, but it's just one of my favourite. It's kind of reaching back into sort of ancient poetry with this epic simile here that goes on and on and on, which is part of what's so wonderful about reading Homer and other ancient poets. And Dante also does this. I could have included Dante in this list, I suppose. I just love the way there are kind of at least three things going on here. You've got a middle-aged woman wanting to, she's dyeing her hair. Essentially, she doesn't want to look as old as she is. The same thing going on with the weather, people hoping that things will brighten up, and also the hint at recession and debt there as well. And these three things all being kind of similes for each other, all just wanting something brighter, more optimistic, and more hopeful. So that's another poet that I'd really heartily recommend. There were quite a few other poets that I really could have included that I've already mentioned, as Coleridge, Dante. Who else could I have included? I was tempted to include Walt Whitman, T.S. Eliot, W.H. Auden, Sylvia Plath, and sort of so many. But I think I tried to be honest with myself with this list. It was almost a kind of desert island poets kind of thing here, and luckily I already had the poems that were mentioned by Joe and Joshua as well. So it sort of crossed out a few other poets that I would have felt bad leaving out. So there are 5 poets that I think you should read, and it would be good for you to get to know them better. And as you can tell from the earlier poets mentioned, there are plenty of poets that I'd love to get to know better too. So for now, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.